remember starting an arts lab a few years ago, and it was just before COVID actually, and it was with a group of people here in London, and the arts lab was sort of based roughly around the counterculture arts lab of the '60s in the UK, where I think the main guy was Jim Haynes,
Mhm.
and the idea was really to kind of bring people together to who wanted to challenge the I guess the corporatization of the arts to draw, socialize, paint, talk about culture, put on culture events, or kind of generally just sort of fuck around. And yeah, I wanted to be part of it, but I didn't really know why. I had really terrible insecurities about my ability to draw. I always have sketch, paint, and even as a classically trained cellist, I had this real sort of imposter syndrome about even calling myself a musician, which probably goes to some reason why I sort of packed it in.
Yeah.
And at the first arts lab meeting, it was youth from Killing Joke who said something that's always stuck with me, and that was the first thing that you need to do is just call yourself an artist. Forget everything else. And I wasn't alone, but I struggled with that. Particularly the whole identity of who I was. Like I'm not an artist. I don't feel like a creative, and even now doing my own sort of graphic design, I feel like a bit of a fake, especially when I compare myself to others. I'm getting
Mhm.
better, but of course, youth was right. Allowing yourself that kind of self affirmation, is really the start. Of your sort of self belief. So anyway, I'm really excited to talk to someone who is so synonymous with and important to. Now, I'm not a fan of genres, but I'm going to call it like the hardcore scene. To find out, if he's faced these issues and how he's navigated them and other issues sort of through his life, and really his musical footprint can't be overstated. Every band that he's been in, like the Hope Conspiracy, the Suicide File, Hesitation Wounds, God Collider, has really produced music that's so, for me, incredibly potent and addictive in its sort of structure and melody, and really like the absolute precision of its attack. So Neeraj
Wow.
Kane, welcome, and it's really great to see you, and thanks for coming on because it's especially a super early Sunday morning for you.
Oh yeah, no, it's thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to it because what you just mentioned is a ongoing struggle
Mm,
for me. Right.
yeah.
So I appreciate this opportunity to talk about it. And yeah, I mean, early mornings anymore, it's like as you get older, it's like I can't sleep
It
anymore
it
anyways.
just kind of absolutely. I mean, I like we were just sort of talking before, and I think I've got kind of worse at sleeping, I think, as I've got older. But I've just got back from India, and I'm like regularly like awake at like 5 a.m. now, and it's like I kind of need to lose this. Anyway, it's just a nightmare. But I must before I forget, actually, I must give a shout out to Jessica Ballard for introducing us.
Yeah, that's
It's probably a
small
couple of months
world.
ago. Really small world. Now I got to know Jessica through when Def Club came over to the UK in
Okay.
November, and Justin Pearson introduced us. So we just kind of kept in touch.
I did not know that she knew Jess Ballard. I did not know
She
that
does,
Justin knew Jess or just Jess knew Justin.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They do. I mean, I don't know how long they've known each other, but
Got it. Yeah.
they certainly know each other very well.
Yeah. Both
Um,
great people.
Amazing.
Yeah. And it's, when I moved to California, I got to know both of them more. I mean, I was a fan of Justin's work,
Yeah,
musical output for years. But also with Jess, I met her through a bunch of mutual LA friends, and she's just one
yeah.
of the nicest people. So it's great. I'm glad that we were able to connect. She's like, "Hey, you're playing shows. I got this friend in UK who's like would love to talk." I'm like, "Perfect. Yes."
It was so random because we so Def Club came over in November, and I'd sort
Mhm.
of previously met Justin in April when they came over for the UK Europe they played Roebone Festival in the
Oh,
Netherlands,
okay.
and but anyway, so I met them up in Glasgow,
Mhm.
and that's when I first met Jess, and we just sort of got chatting, and then I think she was going around with them to some shows and dipping in and out, and then we met again in London. We said, let's keep in touch,
Mhm.
and I forget what it was, and then we said, then she said, okay, I've been having a think about who would be great for your podcast. I'm like, brilliant, okay, and here we are.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's cool.
So, so we're saying, yeah. So it's like the, what I was saying in the intro. The sort of, issues of sort of self belief and all these kind of things. That's sort of quite relevant for you.
Yeah, I've man, it
It's
is.
where to start with it sometimes, isn't it?
Well, I just had this conversation with someone via text, a friend, who, I struggle because I've always had to have a, well, not always, but most now later on, as my bands have not been as active, right?
Mm,
I've always had to have a day job. Yeah, so
yeah.
because I have a day job, I always struggled with calling myself a musician. You know,
Right.
it
Yeah.
was kind of like and I was really cynical and I was really kind of an asshole about it to others too, where it's like, like when I moved, I lived in LA for 16 years, and when I was in
Yeah.
LA, I was like, when someone's like, oh, I'm an actor, I'm like, no, you're not. I mean, you're working at a coffee shop or whatever, and that is a really asshole thing to like
Yeah.
think, because this person is a creative, right?
They're
They
trying.
and
Yeah.
I think I got more because I actually took a couple acting classes in LA towards the
Right.
end of my time in LA, and I was like, God, this is so hard, right?
Wow.
It is, and it is because I felt really stuck um, as a creative like during COVID
Mm,
musically, right? And I was like, I don't know how else I can express. Like, I need to get something out. I really need to figure something out. Like, and a couple, people who were in that world were like, hey, you should look into, like try like just take a couple acting classes, see how it is. Because I was
yeah.
kind of always interested in it, and but I kind of wasn't like someone like, oh, I want to like. I just kind of wanted to see what the craft was, right?
Yeah.
And it gave me a different appreciation to the craft, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm always interested in the processes, right? And so even with music, so I'd never say that again to anybody. I'm like, like,
Mm,
oh, you're not, no, you're an artist, right? Even if
yeah.
you have a day job, you're an artist, right? But it really, and it was, I think, my negative perception of myself that I was projecting onto others, right?
Yeah.
Because I did not call myself a musician, and I still really struggle to call myself a musician because
Well,
I'm not. Oh, go ahead.
no, I was just going to, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, because it's interesting, isn't it? Like thinking of, those sort of situations. I mean, I don't get in any of these, but those sort of situations that you kind of see or observe where, somebody gets introduced to each other and they don't know each other. And it's like, what do you do? What job do you do? That's kind of
Yes.
like the first identifier, isn't it?
And I never respond with I'm a musician.
Wow.
Right? It was always like, oh, I was a teacher, or I'm in education, or I'm in software, or I'm in, that's like, and
Yeah.
now as I've gotten older, my social circle has widened, right? It's not
Mm,
just music, it's not just artists, and
yeah.
now I live back in the Midwest, and I'm a little more isolated from the creative community, so
Mm,
it's a lot more people who aren't necessarily creatives, right? And
mm.
so if I tell them I'm a musician, they're like, "Whoa, awesome!"
They love it.
It's a whole different thing, right? So, but I don't say that, because I always there's an element of not embarrassment, but there's an element of, and this might be just to prior issues that
Mm,
some shame in a way because I didn't
yeah.
whatever making it is, right? It's not like I'm not sustaining myself being a musician. I mean, I'm sustaining myself emotionally and
Yeah.
mentally, but to pay my bills, it never was a thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does totally. I mean, I completely empathize with you on that. I mean, I think like when I was, it's funny as well because like when I was growing up, like my parents, I was born in the north of England
Okay.
in a sort of like a working town. My mum
hmm
worked on a farm.
hmm
My dad, they didn't have a lot of money. My dad's side of the family certainly had no money at all. They were really, really poor. And my dad got his own education. He decided that he was going to stay on at school, and do some qualification. Became like a mechanical engineer, got a
Mhm.
qualification for a
Oh,
mechanical
okay.
engineer, and
Mhm.
he sort of instilled the other problem that he had because of this sort of financial insecurity. He was sort of constantly moving around, like where they lived, and my grandparents would row a lot, so they would then sort of leave home, and so there's a lot of kind of insecurity and instability. So when it came to me coming along, he started talking about, financial security because that's what he didn't have when he was a kid.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how it sort of how that passes through
It
generations.
it is, and it's a generational. I think it. I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know how trauma works, but
Mm,
um, growing up, also within, I grew up in straddling two cultures, right? I grew up
yeah.
with my Indian culture, my South Asian culture, and then me being an American, right? I was born and raised here, everything's here, but my parents
Mm,
weren't strict at all. They were very liberal with me wanting to do what I wanted, which is very grateful and awesome.
mm,
But it's still South Asian, Indian culture is very prominent, right? And
yeah, for
so
sure. Yeah.
and my father's an architect, an artist, and a
Mm,
painter. So he was never like a doctor or an engineer or anything like that.
yeah.
My mom always had to work a job because my father's salary would not pay for us to even live like as a middle class family, right? So I
Mm,
grew up
mm,
seeing a lot of my Indian friends within the community. Um, be fairly wealthy, right?
yeah.
Having like their families having nice cars because their parents were doctors, engineers, or in
Mm,
finance. My dad was an artist and was always out of a job. Um,
yeah.
and right
Yeah.
now, so even coming back to, everyone's like, oh, I moved back to the Midwest to take care of my parents because my parents didn't have that golden kind of nest egg, I guess what they call it, right? After like
Yeah.
retirement, because you've worked so and so for like 30 years at a certain company and you got this, or you're a doctor, you have all, it's not like that, right? So,
Yeah. Totally.
um, uh, for me, my father actually discouraged me from going into the arts because I was also really into illustration and painting.
Mm,
And
mm,
he's like, look at us. Do you want to struggle like us? And this is in the
yeah.
late 80s and early 90s where graphic designers weren't turning into creative directors making crazy, what I'm
Crazy
saying? That
money.
wasn't
Yeah. Yeah.
seen as a viable, you were what's called a commercial. My father called it a commercial artist. That means you like
Mm,
basically drew up designs for logos and stuff like that. And
yeah. Yeah.
everyone I knew wasn't making money. They were all like, I remember once someone was like technically a very talented artist working as a bank teller, a friend of friend's father, right? So
Yeah.
it just wasn't seen as something that I could viably do. So I really shunned the arts, even though it's my passion, right?
Mm, mm.
And so I went into what was more practical, right? I tried,
Intimate. Yeah.
and even when I went to college, which I didn't want to go to, you
Mm,
know, um, because I just wasn't really good at academics, right?
mm.
Like, and even right now, I struggle with the jobs that I do and not struggle, but like, it doesn't come naturally. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
totally feel you with that.
Yeah. So for me to call, so, going back to the idea of calling myself a musician, there was a sense of shame in it until
Really.
and someone asked me the other day in a podcast, if my parents had ever seen me play live. And my parents have never seen me play live.
Really.
My family. It's because I don't feel like I've reached that pinnacle yet. And that's my personal, um,
Mm,
where it's like, because they're not going to see the art in punk and hardcore, right? And
yeah.
many of, I guess there's a term being thrown around like coworker core or coworker music, which is like now like how these hardcore and punk bands are now, when your coworker starts listening to it, it's like mainstream or it's
Oh
like,
my God. Wow. I didn't
right?
know
I
that.
didn't know this. Someone threw it out the other day, like was like, "Oh, that's like coworker music now." And I think they were talking about like Knocked Loose or something like that. And I was like,
Oh my God.
"Hardcore
Right.
band, right?" I don't see that as, but if it's gotten to that point of where, yeah, and they're like a legit hardcore band that started like
Yeah.
touring, playing small, they're like a legit, they're just got popular. But
Yeah.
now it's got to the point where
Absolutely.
if someone called it coworker friendly or coworker, that means like, oh,
Oh
you're
my
a
God.
coworker now. So. I was like,
That's
what?
insane. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. And someone's like, I definitely don't see them as that. I think they're like a, legitimate,
I mean,
like heavy band,
it's a
but
funny,
like,
it's a funny one actually because I mean, there is a part of me that, it's completely nonsensical and it's really selfish. But when you kind of find a band and they're really small and you maybe get to know them or whatever, then they kind of start to get a little bit bigger and it's like, why is this happening?
yeah, yeah.
I don't
There's
know
a,
what it is and I don't like it.
yeah, yeah. And there's an element of that because there's a selfishness of like, hey, that's mine. Right. And
Yeah, yeah,
that's happened to me when I was younger too, but now I think the landscape of music is just so different, right?
yeah,
And it's great for, younger bands who are getting that sort of
yeah, totally. Yeah,
that sort of exposure. I think it's, having music get reaching that audience is fantastic.
absolutely. No,
But
you're totally right. Yeah,
like going back to like I still have like no a lot of times my coworkers don't know that I play in band. Oh, like
mm,
while I don't talk about it. I don't it's like
yeah,
it's become a different life, and I struggle with that because first and foremost, and my partner was like, I was talking to my partner the other day. I was like, when I go online and if I was like if someone was to Google my name, my jobs don't come up. My
yeah,
music comes up, right? Or my
yeah,
my creative output comes up. So that would,
absolutely.
so that's something that where, and when I moved to LA, I was playing with an old friend of mine she's from the punk scene from actually from the Midwest, and she's, well established musician in LA now, and she's like, why don't you call yourself a musician? You're a musician. Just
Yeah,
because you come from the punk scene doesn't mean you're not a musician. Why do you have such a hard time? And it took me a long time for myself, and I still struggle with it, right?
yeah.
And also partially because I'm not formally trained. And now that you're saying that you're formally trained, you actually
Well,
trained as a cellist, right? Like,
I did, yeah, yeah, I did. I started I started when I was 8,
Mhm.
and I went through, did all my exams, and I gave it up when I think I was about 17 when I gave it up, and it was always like my dad's thing. He wanted me to be music. He was a great singer. He was like
Mhm.
he sang in like bass in the in choirs.
Yeah, yeah.
He was very into kind of classical music, but some of the like the old school like kind of Nat King Cole's and
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
really kind of classical stuff. And he wanted me to get into music, and and I had this because I'm an only child, and I had this sort of issue of the spotlight always being on me and me never feeling like I could say no because I'd feel like I was letting them down. All,
Same. I'm an only child as well. Same thing.
all
Yeah.
those kind of things. So I kind of went along with it, but I think and then I kind of started to get into punk, right, and hardcore, and I just couldn't see how those two at that time, this is in the kind of early 80s, how those two could ever work together. I just didn't see
Yeah.
that. I see it very differently now.
No, yeah.
But I went through it, and eventually, I had to give it up. I didn't like the framework. I didn't like
Yeah.
the constraints of it. I think
Yeah.
in a way, a lot of ways, doing that formal training helped with some discipline, but also it had a negative effect. It made me hate the discipline of doing it.
Yeah. I can kind of relate in the sense of for me, while I was playing music, I also, became a teacher.
Mm,
High school teacher, and for a long time I was in education, and I learned how people learn, right? That's one of the main things. Like how, people learn very differently. People
yeah.
are different in how they take in information, and I realized that one that okay, I have my own ADHD issues,
Mm,
which wasn't diagnosed in the 80s or not.
absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
they didn't really think about that. You just
No.
oh, he's not paying attention, he's not focused,
Absolutely.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so I fell behind, but then also when I tried taking up an instrument, because my parents at that time, oh, take piano, take guitar, take something, right? I took guitar, and the
Mm,
guitar teacher was like, he's not practicing.
mm,
You're wasting your money. right? So he's not learning anything. So after about a month of taking guitar lessons, because I didn't want to play Green Sleeves or This Land Is Your Land,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I it didn't connect. I stopped, right? And I never like
Mm,
revisited it. And then like when I was in junior high school, I tried taking clarinet because
mm,
oh, let's do it. I want to try playing an instrument, you know?
yeah.
And practicing just wasn't purposeful, and this still fits into my playing now, where it's like with clarinet, you're running scales or you're running certain rudiments, right? And
Yep.
like
Yep.
I'm doing sheet music,
Mm,
um, and it was and sheet music is very and music theory is very mathematical, right? So
yeah.
people who are
Absolutely.
very math oriented or logic oriented grasp music theory no problem,
Yeah.
right? For me, I had a very hard time with music theory
Yeah.
because it just felt very abstract. Even though
Me
it's
too.
not, even it's
Me too.
mathematical, it's right there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I got some of the basics, but when it came down to like, I remember I was in college and I took a music theory course. At this point, I'd been playing in bands, but I took a music theory course to, oh, this is going to help me. And I walked out on the final exam, and because we had to
Yeah.
transcribe an aria, right,
Yeah.
of all and I was like, this just seems like gobbledygook. And I
Yeah.
and I remember like turning in, and I remember the final was the same day that I had to play a show with a punk band that a hardcore band I was doing in like Cleveland, and so they were waiting outside to pick me up, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'll be done with this final, and I'm like,
This is
what am I
insane.
doing? I'm
This
like
is
going to play a
insane.
show. Why am I doing this stupid shit right now? Like I don't need it, right? And so the professor looks, and I took a withdrawal on that class. Like not a
Yeah.
fail, but basically I took a withdrawal because like I wasn't going to pass the final exam, so I just dropped out of the class. And the professor
Well,
was like, you didn't finish." I'm like, dude, and internally I'm like, I'm going to play a show. Why do I want me to transcribe an aria for? Right?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
even like practicing had to have a purpose, right? And as I was in education, you find that kids learn best when they're doing stuff that they're interested in, right? So when I found punk, there was a purpose for me to practice,
Got you.
right?
Yeah.
Because
Of
I
course.
wanted to learn how to play those songs, or I wanted an outlet to this frustration that I was feeling with whatever it was, the outlet, or being the outcast, or this angst, this aggression. And I found a power chord, and it opened the gates of hell, if you will, right?
That was kind of it. Yeah. It's
And so,
yeah. Sorry. Go
yeah.
on.
Oh no, and that's kind of where it goes from. But because of the failures of not being a more accomplished going to into school band and then maybe going to jazz band or not
Yeah.
learning guitar and keeping with it, I there's still a sense of like I'm not legit. That I feel like I have imposter syndrome always, right?
Well, it's interesting because I mean, what you were saying there. I passed my practical, the
Mhm.
actual playing.
Yeah, yeah.
I got through all the grades, but the theory, I struggled with the theory, and
Mhm.
I know exactly what you mean about the mathematical elements to it. And I was at school, I was okay at maths. When you said something didn't come naturally, that was me with
Yeah.
maths. I can't. So and I think that translated through into the theory. And I did some exams, and then I was just like, do you know what? I'm not going to get through the next lot. I'm
Yeah,
just not going to do it. It's pointless.
but then like, and it's not a knock on classical music or classically trained musicians because if you really like the music, you learn it. Like you,
You
you
learn
will
it.
want to learn. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, that will drive you to learn it, right? So if I hear like a
yeah,
beautiful classical piano piece, and I'm like,
mm,
God, because piano is like I
yeah.
love the
It's
piano.
beautiful. Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
a beautiful instrument, and I love
yeah.
the emotion that you get out of a piano. I think a lot of times you can't convey through a lot of other instruments. At
Very
least,
true.
because you're playing both. You're playing the bass and you're playing the bass clef and the treble clef, right? So you're like, you
Yeah,
can get the melodies and the crux of the song, but like,
yeah,
I'm like listening to some of these things. I'm like, God, I want to learn this, right? And then you have that
yeah,
drive to kind of practice and learn or figure it out, right? But
yeah,
if you're just
yeah,
like going through, okay, here's the song that you got to learn for this. I'm like, I don't. This thing doesn't grasp, doesn't connect with me. Then why do I want to practice something? And I see my cousin's daughter, like my cousin's like my brother, and it's like I see my niece. She's like
mm,
learning piano, and I'm like, hey. you're awesome at this. You're doing all these like practice. And she's just like, I'm like, okay, let's sit down. Let's try to write a song together, right? And I'll just sit behind the piano and play like a few chords that I know. And
Yeah.
she's just like, her head explodes. Like, oh, I can't do that. Oh, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And so there's a difference, in you're a trained musician, yes, but let's write. You know way more than I do. You can shred that piano way more than I do. But like
Yeah.
there's a whole theory within like pop songs on piano. They're like four chords, right? Or four or
Yeah.
five chords that are the main thing for almost every pop song.
Yeah.
And so it's a very different, and because I think within our culture, not just South Asian culture, but I think within any culture,
Mm.
that sort of mastery of something is seen as the you now have the stamp of approval that you're a musician, or you have the stamp of
Yes,
approval
that's
now
true.
you're this, right? And if you don't have that mastery, then are you like I'm not a shredder, right? I'm
Yeah.
not going to play like Ingve, or I'm not going to play like Kirk Hammett, and
Mm.
because everyone's just kind of like, but there's a lot of people who, did stay in their bedrooms when they were teenagers and learn every lick off of Ride the Lightning,
Funny, isn't
right?
it?
And
Yeah.
and I'm envious of those people, but because of my attention issues, I couldn't do that, right? And even like a couple years ago, like this is more than a couple years ago, I mean 5, 6 years ago, I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a guitar class. I'm gonna take a
Mm.
class to learn how to just to learn how to do like some scales. And
Mm.
I felt like I was in elementary or middle school all over again, like sitting there like an idiot, being like, why am I here? And then I didn't do it, right? And so it's like, but if it was like in a song that I was learning I'm like, oh, this needs a solo here. I'll like noodle around with it until I get something
Until
that's,
you get it.
yeah.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Of the the number of people that must go through in any I don't know if you want to call it discipline or whatever, but go through that and they don't get the right environment, you know, for learning and for really sort of finding that purpose. How much is actually wasted and kind of
Yeah.
goes without, it's like almost like something that's unfulfilled. There must be so many people that sort of
Oh,
go through that.
yeah. I mean,
It's
and
frightening.
that's where I feel like I'm lucky with punk and finding punk and hardcore.
Mm,
Or just like the underground like subculture, because I don't know what I would have done creatively,
mm,
because I never thought of myself as like, oh, be a I want to be in a band, I'm gonna be an
yeah,
musician. It was ne it was
never
something that
like
was
that.
in the back of my mind as like this is a fantasy,
Yeah,
right? It wasn't like,
yeah.
oh, and I always dreamed of like being on big stages and like that kind of when you're like young,
When
because
you're little,
looking at like
yeah, yeah,
rock stars and stuff,
yeah,
right? But I
yeah.
never thought that I would be able to, like um, I just never thought that I'd be able to create my own music, and that's
Mm,
partially why I did start creating my own music, because I couldn't really play other people's music. Does that make sense? Like
it
the
does,
band,
yeah,
I was like, oh, I don't know how Led Zeppelin is playing these crazy
yeah,
solos, right? And
yeah.
I don't know if I'm gonna figure it out. So when I heard bands that were like not like Led Zeppelin, but had the intensity or the angst that we're still able to convey, like within punk or within indie rock or within
Mm,
hardcore. It was like something that just like, and I also kind of, even though I follow hip hop much now, but I also kind of give hip hop that kind of credit, where it's like, you're doing something with sort of very little, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
starting off, and then building this I mean the roots of it, right? Are like, because you did have a lack of resources. You weren't able to have
yeah.
like a band in your apartment in New York, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, so there's like it's always kind of like the what is it? Mother is the necessity of invention or something, like, or necessity. What's the what term I'm talking about, right? The
The
thing
Yes.
invent something, yeah. But you know what I'm talking about, yeah.
I think
uh,
I was I mean when you first got into kind of like hardcore punk and hardcore, I'm always interested what it is about that style of music that attracts people and what attracts people to getting into kind of like R&B or soul and stuff like that, because like for me, like when I my sort of turning point was when I first heard the Ramones, and
Yeah.
it was Judy's a Punk, and that was it. That was just like game over. And I've tried to work out why. I'd heard a load of music before, but that was the first one that just like kind of blew me away. And I don't know why, because my parents hated it. My dad used to stand at the door saying, "Oh, you listen to that bang and thump stuff again." That's kind of what, and I'd be like, "That, yeah."
Uh, uh,
What was it for you?
I think it's I saw people like me doing it.
Hmm.
Like not necessarily like looking like me or anything like that, but like one, outcasts. Um, two, um, like it wasn't about the showmanship. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
when I watched like growing up, you see like the rock bands that you look, it was all showmanship, right? Like
Showmanship. Yeah.
everyone like, the guys in HopeCon really kind of, and I said a kind of a provocative, I'm like, yeah, you know what? I think Led Zeppelin's overrated. Everyone's like, are you an idiot? And I was like, I mean, yeah, they're amazing musicians,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
they've written classic songs. I'm not
Yeah.
taking that away from them, right? But to me, it didn't connect, and it never will, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I can see, and I remember an ex-girlfriend of mine got me a Led Zeppelin box set one time, right?
Mm,
I'm like, all right, cool, and I like maybe got through like two. I'm like, okay, all right, this is like, yeah, it just doesn't connect.
doesn't connect. Yeah.
And then when I listen to like Black Flag or Cro-Mags and
Mm,
then when I first listened to Bad Brains, when I first listened to some of that early, or like less than that, but I actually really got into British punk first. So
mm,
and British
mm,
and oi, right?
mm. Right. Yeah.
So like that kind of genre where it's just like it was kind of working class. There's this
Mm,
angst about it that these guys are wearing like scarves and like fucking leather
yeah.
pants and shit, like
Yeah.
Led
Yeah.
Zeppelin, right? And I was like, that's not me, And then I see like these like punks with mohawks, even though I never had a mohawk and I was never a skinhead, but like
Yeah.
that shit like really was just like visceral.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like and it was um and there was just like kind of this rawness to it and this like riot
Yeah.
element to it that was just like, like watching Clash videos and like
Yeah.
seeing
Yeah.
like Sham 69. I was like, oh my God, what is this? This is amazing, right? Exploited, UK, just like a lot of that stuff was just like, and I was introduced through like skateboarding. For
Mm,
me,
okay.
skateboarding was like the gateway to my life. If I had to say anything, skateboarding
Yeah.
was the gateway to change my life, right? And within those skate videos, it's like Black Flag, JFA, Exploited,
Mm, mm,
UK Subs,
mm.
GBH,
Yeah. Yeah.
and stuff like that. And then like you start exploring, and then like foreskins and like yeah, it's just like Oi, Sham 69, like
Mm, mm.
stuff like that just like goes, starts getting like really like, oh, what is this, right? And then of course
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the US stuff like the Ramones, Cro-Mags, Bad Brains, that was always there, but I felt like one, it was subversive. It was so
Mm.
subversive at that time, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it was
Totally.
just so counterculture to everything, and I loved it, right?
Yeah.
Where when I saw Led Zeppelin or the Beatles and stuff like that, I was like, mm, it's like you have to be like,
Yeah.
those guys were like some of those guys were session musicians, It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
where it's like it almost felt like when you looked at punk, it was in hardcore, it was almost like these people had to do this, otherwise they were gonna
Mm,
fucking explode, right?
yeah.
Otherwise something bad was gonna happen, right? Right?
It was at that sort of time as well, wasn't it? Where
Yeah, and
there
like
was just like a lot of shit going on.
yeah, and I didn't really, I'm not really familiar with, my knowledge of UK history, especially in the 70s, is from those punk bands,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right? Of what was
yeah,
going on, and then the sway to the right, within
mm,
the oi scene or punk scene, right?
yeah. How that
You're like
splintered. Yeah,
you're like, what is happening here with a genre that stemmed from like Jamaican immigrants coming in, like
totally, totally.
like this,
Yeah,
so it was like really fascinating, but like, and it did feel multicultural in a weird way, at least
yeah,
from the UK thing, and also in the US, you had the Bad Brains, you had the Ramones, you had, um,
mm,
it was, it felt like I didn't feel like I fit into the world that was presented to me in Midwest suburban United States,
Mm,
being a
mm,
South Asian, a kid of South Asian immigrants, but also into, this is when skateboarding was subversive, right? Oh,
yeah.
you're a skater kid. Oh, that's like, you're gonna get beat up or you're fighting somebody all the time, right?
Yeah.
There was no Tony Hawk Pro Skater. There was no skateboarding in the Olympics, which, you know, um, it was still seen as a so the music part of it is I gravitate towards this. I never really got into the Beatles. I never really gotten into
Mm,
that stuff because it was, I know the cultural importance to
absolutely.
pop culture and their genius as now I became more of a open-minded. But when I was in high school and junior high school, I was like, what is angry, political, and just makes me want to
Yeah.
skateboard faster, right?
And the kind of and the kind of like the sort of the kids that you were hanging out with, were they, I mean, you would you call them, like kind of like the outcasts,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like around
yeah. It was
school and post school and stuff like
It
that.
was really interesting because my school was a little different. There were some people who were like the jocks or like the popular, but
Yeah.
they also loved skateboarding and punk rock.
Right. Right.
So they would kind of on the surface at school, like to get girls
Yeah.
or whatever, be like more normal.
Right.
But then like
Okay.
after school, like, hey, dude, we going skating or what? We're gonna go hit this, bench later. We're gonna go hit this curb later, right? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And then
The
we just
two faces of the jocks.
I'm like, dude, just come out, just join us fully. You don't have to. But then I was also an athlete, so it was like very different, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It was but all of us were definitely like the outcasts in the sense of like we just loved this new burgeoning.
Mm,
I'm a Gen Xer, right? So it's like
yeah.
a lot of it was
Yeah.
that time where it's like, you know. Alternative music was hitting big, right? Like grunge and
Yeah.
all that stuff, right? But so I was already so in deep with like punk and hardcore that stuff was like radio rock. That was like coworker. I was like, this shit is garbage, man. Nirvana, what the hell is this nonsense? No, Soundgarden, no, it's not punk, it's not hardcore. They're not fucking.
Yeah.
The show isn't going to end in a riot. Like that's not from. I want to go to that show where it's scary to go to the show, right? Uh, but I mean, and then again, in retrospect, it's like, oh my God, Nirvana, great, Smashing Pumpkins, amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you're that young, you got these blinders on because
Absolutely.
you want to be part of that crew so bad, or that outcast. I'm such an
Yeah.
outcast.
Yeah, there is that sort of angst and yeah, sort of tunnel vision,
Yeah,
that, and almost then which seems so like so out of touch now, given that how many different influences are coming into music and
yeah,
making music, the creation of new music so much more exciting. But at that time it was just like, you've got if I remember being at school once, right, and I that it was at that time when you go with your kind of sports holdall or whatever, and you'd write the names of your favorite bands on and stuff like that. And I remember I'd sort of written some like kind of random stuff on the bands that I liked, and I never thought of myself as liking music that was too diverse. But obviously, for some people, what I like was like completely weird. I remember this really kind of larger than life big punk guy, and we're talking like maybe 13 or 14, and I just wanted to like not be kind of seen or stand out or anything like that.
yeah,
And I saw that he was holding up my bag, and I was just like, oh fuck.
yeah.
I just got humiliated because I'd like, stuff like, Crass and Vice Squad and that kind of stuff. And then
Yeah.
I'd written like the Teardrop Explodes on and stuff like that. I was like, what the fuck's this? I'm like, whose bag's this? I'm like, oh.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting because I'd walk around the hallways with a Walkman,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And in it I had a tape. I remember it was one of my favorite bands is Shudder to Think,
yeah,
a band from DC, and they are you can't get any weirder, right? I mean,
yeah,
I mean you can, but they are really eclectic, right? His vocal
yeah.
sounds were different. They weren't even like within like the punk and hardcore scene. They'd be seen as like, what is this,
What
right?
is this? Yeah,
But I love it. They're one of my favorites. And I remember there was these. three cheerleaders that used to sit next to me, and I think my French class or something. And we were friends, but they were just like, "What do you always have a headphones on? What are you listening to?" And then one girl I gave them like, "Here, you can listen to what I'm listening to," and it was showed her to think, and her facial expression was just like she had no clue. Like it was
No
just
clue.
blowing her head. Yeah, her mind was just like getting. Yeah, she was like, what is happening here, right? Because it was so foreign because at that time, I think New Kids on the Block was big, right?
Right. Oh, of
Like,
course.
and that's
Yeah.
what like teen girls were listening to, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so like, but she was just like, it was just like, what? It was just so foreign. So for me to like walk around with my headphones on was almost like my own armor in a way,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because I didn't feel like included, and at that time when I first started getting into it, I didn't think I could play even that, but it still connected
Mm.
to me where I was
Still connect.
drawn to it, right? I wasn't drawn to any other music prior to that to that extent, you know.
Mm. I mean, how much like in your life does like your instinct, so you kind of gut instinct sort of drive you, and how much do you use that compared to say, I don't know, like analyzing things?
I well, it's really hard. Like I've as I've become as I've been playing for over, more and more over the years, obviously, getting
Mm.
more experienced. It's hard for me to listen to music,
Right.
because I analyze it.
Right. Okay.
And the one thing about now growing into the fact that, oh, okay, I do think like a musician, I'm creative, I'm an artist. Even right now talking to you and saying that is hard for me to say, right? But it's really hard for me to listen to music
Mm.
because music from the same genre, and put it that way,
Yeah.
similar genres, because I analyze it and dissect it, and it's not fun.
Do you
Like
compare yourself?
I'll be like, God, that riff is incredible. Or I'll be like, God,
Yeah.
why did you guys write that bridge there? Oh, this song could, or and then I'll get cocky and or
Right.
criticize, be critically analytical, like in not a good way, right? And
Right.
music is supposed to be a thing, an art form where it kind of transports you somewhere.
Yeah.
Or for me, it
Yeah.
was, it took me away from or helped me deal with certain emotions, and when you break it down to its fundamentals, it's really tough. And so
Yeah.
now I find
Yeah.
myself listening to music where, oh, I know that this is completely out of my wheelhouse. So it's like my partner's really into soul.
Mm.
And so we went to a couple of soul concerts, these newer, like kind of newer soul bands, this guy named Aaron Frazier. Um, and
Yeah.
I had heard of that they're like the neo soul kind of stuff, but these bands, they sound like they were probably around from the 60s, but they're like new, right?
New. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and they are incredible. Like the
Yeah.
musicianship is just on another level,
Yeah.
right?
Another
And I'm
level.
just
Yeah.
like, this is awesome. And I was like, I'm probably, I mean, if I was asked to be in one of these bands, I'd be like, this is the best thing that happened to me, right? Because I would love to play in a band like that, right? Like
Yeah.
absolutely love. I'd play drums in it, I'd play bass in it, I'd do whatever, right? Whatever. If you guys
Yeah.
wanted me to do whatever, I'd do whatever, right? Just because I want to be in a soul band so bad.
Yeah.
Because I found a new appreciation for a style of music that I don't it
Mm.
didn't connect with me like it did, so I don't analyze it. I can listen to it and just like be like, oh, this is nice.
Got
This
you.
is chill, right? I'm not like, oh, that bass line is sick. Oh, I mean, it happens. It happens as I get to know the genre more. But on
Yeah.
initial when you're listening to, but when I like listen to like any newer hardcore band, I'm just like, whoa, that drum part is awesome, or that guitar part is sick,
Yeah.
or that riff is or that bass is like that, or oh, the drum production on this. Did they do this or did they do that? Or the guitar, well, I wonder what kind of amp he's using. I don't want to do that. I just want to listen to music. But from an analytical standpoint, like what you're talking about analyzing, it's not a gut, when I'm writing music now, if that's what you're saying, like
Well,
analytical.
also, yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had, the past 5 years since COVID, I've had a really, if I'm being frank, a hard time
Yeah.
with being creative again. And it's slowly
Yeah.
coming back. But I think you just go through phases, maybe.
Mm.
Um, but I'm trying not to be as analytical, but it's really hard these days. And I think technology has really changed that. And I was having this conversation with someone was like, Now everybody's writing riffs on computers,
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
right? With GarageBand, because it's an easy way to record your ideas, and it's an amazing tool, right? But everyone's also writing out drum parts,
Mm,
right? And I
mm,
remember
mm,
I'm playing in a project where a couple weeks ago we got together and just started like I brought in like I'm playing bass in it and
mm.
I brought in like a or I was able to like kind of riff on a bass idea and I miss workshopping songs with other people.
Right.
Does that make sense? A lot of times now we're writing music in silos, right?
Yeah.
And then you're sending it to your friend or sending it to your other bandmates to be like, hey, I did this. And that works. That totally works too. But there's a magic in workshopping songs, which for me, there's a different element of creativity in that,
Mm. Where the
right?
others are in the room and you just
Well, you're in the
kind of
room and some
feeding off
yeah, feed off
that
each other, and sometimes
that energy.
something comes out that you might not happen when you're sitting in
I
your home
agree.
studio, right?
I totally agree. Totally agree.
And that magic is sometimes, how do you do that? And I think with HopeCon, it was really fortunate that we were writing most of the record in a room together.
So, so here's an
It wasn't exchanging computer ideas. It was most of that, I'd say all of it. I mean, I'd come up with a riff or someone would come up with an idea on a computer, but then we'd go and workshop it, right? Or like,
yeah.
and then someone's like, that part doesn't work. All right, cool. It doesn't work. Just because it's recorded on a computer doesn't mean it's like set in stone, right?
So what was that like? I'll come back to that actually, to that, kind of working together in the room. But what that specifically, that experience of getting back into the room together,
I think
what was your kind of feeling in the run up to it, and then when you're actually involved in it?
I think with Hope Conspiracy, it never went away because all of us are
Yeah,
very close friends.
yeah, yeah,
Um, we're like a family, so it's like a
yeah,
very different experience than a lot of other bands that I've been in.
yeah.
But um, we never really stopped being in a room
Mm,
in a weird way because even when we decided that because we were technically started writing new songs after our last release, which was in 2009, 2010.
yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah,
But we just never, because three of us had moved to the West Coast. So
yeah,
me and the drummer were in the same city.
yeah.
Uh, our bass player was in Oakland, so he was in California still. So the three
California,
of
at
us
least in the area.
were
Yeah.
getting together all the time, and we'd make it like at least like once or twice a month at that point, early on. But then life happened. People were, other people were playing, started getting bigger gig in other bands, like we're, like
Mm,
expanding jobs, and real life happens, and
mm,
so we weren't getting together as much, but it was still, hey, if we're gonna work on new songs, we're getting together in a room. So it was either
yeah, yeah.
our practice space or practice space up there. So it was never something that we had ever dismissed,
Mm,
right? It's just the way that we do it, right?
yeah,
And it's just the way that I think that band is always gonna do it, right?
yeah.
Um, and so a couple of the guys I'm playing with now are, are older friends who I'd played with years ago before I left the Midwest and playing again, and there's that chemistry there that's still undeniable because when you're in the room,
Yeah. So this is interesting. This is what I wanted to come back to was that kind of, and I've got more into this. I think as I've got older, and then like my partner's been doing quite a bit of work on like sort of decolonizing yoga and decolonizing the way that we kind of think, the sort of traditional societal ways that sort of people think, and energy has sort of
Mhm.
played a big part in what she's been uh learning about. And so it made me think of an example. So a couple of years ago, I did an interview with Stuart Braithwaite from Mogwai
Okay.
and his wife Elizabeth Electra, who's a musician as well.
Mhm.
And during the lockdowns, they got talking to about I think another four or five musicians who I think Stuart or Elizabeth knew one of them, but the rest of them they didn't really know.
Mhm.
So for all intents and purposes, they were kind of strangers, certainly musically
Right.
strangers. And when the lockdowns were lifted, they got together without having written anything. I think they maybe sort of shared some ideas, but nothing too kind of concrete. Got together in the studio up in a remote island in Scotland,
Okay.
With the objective basically of kind of writing an album. And I think they ended up writing, I think there was 6 or 7 songs, some sort of quite long ones, but basically an album's worth. And they were talking about that whole kind of process of, like, was it scary to kind of get together with, and basically be creative in front of complete strangers, how that kind of works. And the album is phenomenal. I mean, it really is, like, really special.
Mhm.
And it was that wouldn't I don't that wouldn't have happened if they'd been doing it in silos, doing it kind of remotely and stuff like that. It was the energy that really kind of
Yeah.
did it.
Yeah, and I think getting ideas started
Mm,
like are really, I think the technology that we have is amazing for it, right? For
mm,
sure.
yeah,
But sometimes I also think that you can do both, right?
yeah,
With HopeCon, we didn't do much technology. It was
yeah.
mostly in the room. Hey,
In
like
the room.
literally, it was like, hey, you got an idea? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hesitation Wounds was all in the room.
All in
Like
the room.
the whole
Yeah.
purpose of that band, Jeremy's idea for that band was let's get 4 musicians who've never played together before in the room and write as many songs as we can in like a certain time period and
Yeah.
then record that output in the same session, right?
Yeah.
So the first EP was written in I think 2 days, and then recorded on the third. The first full length we did was written in 4 days, recorded on the fifth, and then I actually
Yeah.
broke my arm riding motorcycle the week
Oh
after
God.
with the guitars. So, but
Jeez.
the songs were written all in like we got in a room and we were hammering out like, okay, I got
Yeah.
this idea, I got that idea, I got this idea, or but none of it was pre-planned, right? I hadn't
Yeah.
come up with stuff on a computer necessarily. It was all like
Wow.
kind of free form, right? And I love writing like that. Like I
Right.
absolutely
Okay.
love writing like that because that's when I had never played with Jay Weinberg, drummer at the
Mm,
time, and his energy was very different. Jeremy's kind of like, his presence in the room was just kind of like directing little things, here and there. What do you think about that? And I'm
yeah.
someone who likes working collaborative. There's definitely some people who are very much like, I'm gonna write the song. Here's the drums. Here's this. I want you to play that one, and that works for some people, right? And that's
Yeah.
fine. If I was in a situation where someone's like, "Hey, can you play that?" I'm sure, cool. I'm very even keel with it. However, I just love playing music, so it's like I don't
Yeah.
care. But when it comes to like to writing stuff, I love it because sometimes you capture lightning in a bottle that I just don't think you're going to capture on a laptop.
Totally. I completely agree.
And
Completely
maybe
agree.
that's
It's
an antiquated notion now, just being an older statesman, you know?
yeah, but I think as humans we all kind of have that. We all see that when that happens, there's a feeling that you get, there's an elation that you get, that even if you're nervous about doing it, when you see kind of what comes out at the end of it, just like, fuck yeah, that was.
Yeah,
I mean,
like
you
you
can't
walk with.
you can't but help it.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's like you can't beat it. Like you leave a practice space or you leave. Yeah, and with like Suicide Fall, this was big. Like that band, I don't think it would have at that era. We didn't have, when we were writing that stuff, computers didn't. With the
Yeah,
garage wasn't around yet, right?
yeah,
So I was doing everything on a FOSS, like a Tascam,
yeah,
and but a lot of those riffs are written off the drummer's creativity, right?
yeah.
And so
Interesting.
the Jared Alexander, the drummer in that, and Jared Shavelson the same way. Both Jareds, one from HopeCon, one from Suicide Thought, are incredible drummers, and so
Yeah,
their creativity is what I feed off of, right?
yeah,
It's not necessarily a riff-driven band. It's a with Suicide Thought, some of the early stuff was like, dude, that drum riff is sick. I'm gonna write a guitar
yeah,
part to it, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
and when you're doing it on the computer and coming up with ideas, I'm also having to do the drum part when I'm not a drummer, right? I mean, I can
yeah,
play drums to get by in a band, but not to the point where, a drummer who's like has like their chops down, like both like
yeah.
the guys I've played with, it's different when you can write to something that someone else writes, and I really enjoy that. That's like a very strong. So like even in all the bands, it's the other musicians who make that possible, right? It's not just like, oh, well, Neeraj, you play in this band and that riff. And I always say, I'm like, it is that communal writing process that
Mm,
creating with these other people that
yeah.
creates that final piece.
It makes me think of the the different bands that you've been in and the different individuals, the different personalities.
Hmm.
I even think of like your kind of producer, your engineers. Everybody's got their own sort of personalities, their own ways of working that where they are at the best and ways of working where they're not at the best. And it just makes me think of how many variables there are to how aware you need to be of others, to kind of get. I mean, everybody's got to take responsibility for their own shit,
Yeah.
but also, kind of like an awareness that if somebody's really uncomfortable doing something one way, it's like,
I
okay,
mean,
it's a lot to consider.
we've run into that. Not, I mean, we've had, a close friend of ours who's been in and out of Hope Khan's writing process a couple of times.
Yeah.
Um, and he just thinks in a very different way,
Mm,
right? So at some points we're like, hey, maybe it's not the best thing, because he's very and that's his writings, and he's an incredible musician, like an
yeah.
incredible musician, but his working style is just different for Hope Conspiracy, right? So, um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's like for us, it's like I'm never attached to any ideas,
Mm.
right?
Which I think has to be super important to
And
be
I
like
think
that,
that's a
isn't it?
part of, letting go of your ego, like kind of like the ego part of it, and I think that there's a lot of that within art,
Yeah.
being artists, right?
Absolutely.
But when you're trying to come up with as a band, you're trying to come, if you're a solo artist or whatever, or it's your
Yeah.
band and you've got people playing for you, that's a whole different thing. But when you're doing a collaborative effort, it's like, you got to be, I'm very flexible. If I come up with there's so many riffs that I had for Hope Con. I was like, God, this is gonna be the best. And they're like, or let's take this part. And I was like, oh man, really? And I was like, okay. I'm like, what's best for the song, right? What's best for the idea is where we're
Yeah.
gonna go, and that's the end result, right? And there's
I mean,
still
that's
I'll be honest, there's still sometimes I was listening to one of the songs on the new record or older. I was like, man, I still think that should have gone one more
they
time.
should have
Or I
kept that
still think I
in.
should have kept that in there. But hey,
But it's but that not being precious to your own ego, precious to your own ideas is I've struggled with that. It's like you need to let it go. You need to let
yeah,
it
yeah,
go.
yeah, you know, let it go. Yeah, you
So
know, let it go.
whoever's talking to you has got their valid opinion. You need to not be focused on what you're doing. Listen to
Yeah.
what they're saying.
And kind of everyone has I think what happens is everyone has kind of their own role in every band, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and and like within Hope Conspiracy, our bass player is kind of like the songsmith, if you will, like in the
mm,
sense of like he really understands structure, like he's really good at structuring, right? And for
yeah,
me, I come from like let's just do verse, chorus, bridge out,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Right? Where and it's funny, I come to that writing style now, but prior to that, hardcore and punk didn't necessarily follow any sort of structure, right? Which I
Any
thought
sort
was
of structure.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true.
But now I've fallen into that structure because it's easy.
Yeah.
Or it's easy to kind of remember, but like Suicide Fault does not have a verse chorus structure at all. You know, I mean there was some like 1 minute 20, 1 minute and 20 second songs, right? It's like they were not, like so it's like
If you're going to
very
get a structure though, it's got to be quick.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I think that the ego part of it is also, and that also kind of falls into the musician part, calling yourself a
Mm,
musician, because I'm not like it's really hard for me to self-promote. I have a really hard time self-promoting. I have a
yeah,
really hard time being like, hey, check this out, check that out, check that out. Everyone's like, oh, and now with this, the way
yeah.
that the world is with promotion, it's just like if you're not constantly doing something, then are you doing anything? Right?
It's crazy, isn't it?
And I'm just really not good at that, and some people are really good at that, and that's partially why I think that's also kind of goes back to our initial, calling yourself a musician,
Yeah,
because I don't, and it's partially like, oh yeah, because I don't know a Mixolydian scale or a
yeah,
pentatonic, whatever. So
yeah.
does that not make me a musician? But can I write a song? I'd like to think I can, at least
It's
for.
it's almost like kind of musicians are expected to have as a like a default, like the ability to market, marketing skills and things like that. It's
Yeah.
like not everybody's like that. You need a certain personality to. I can't do that. I fucking
Yeah, yeah.
hate
And I
it.
know a lot of those people that are, you know, I mean, they're artists, but
Yeah,
they're more marketers than they are artists. Does that
yeah.
make
Then they are artists. Yeah, very
and that's
true.
fine. And
Yeah,
that's great. But for me, it's really hard to do that because I'm sort of an introvert, even
yeah,
though a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
people see me as
Agreed.
social as someone who's social because I do need that a social interaction. But um, and it's a part of insecurity, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of my insecurity of am I really a guitar player?
Yeah.
Am I
I mean, I
really a
was I, I
musician?
was the I was the same. I was really shy when I was a kid, and my personality is definitely an introvert. And you kind of learn to live with it and adapt.
Hmm.
As you go through life, because you're in situations, you work and you have to face situations that you'd rather not do. But
Yeah.
so you do adapt. But still, now I find myself there are situations where I kind of think I'd rather not be here, rather be
Yeah.
somewhere else. Not doing
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Lately, like even going to shows has been kind of rough.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, and that's kind of more like, I've always battled with mental health,
Mm.
going through, and like going into a large room with even like a lot of friends that I know
Yeah.
a lot of these
Yeah.
people here,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
um and they're awesome. And then, the initial anxiety of going into that is hard.
Yeah.
Once I get there, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm here. Like I get to
Yeah.
see my friends and they're doing great things and so happy for them and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
I'm
I
glad this.
I
Yeah.
I know what you mean. I mean, and another thing. I mean, I quit drinking just before COVID started as well, and
Mhm.
that's. I mean, so much better for me.
Yeah, yeah.
But whereas to use it as a sort of coping mechanism for those sort of situations,
A
and now,
social lubricant, if you will.
yeah, now I
Yeah.
don't have that loop. I've got to find something else, that's gonna,
Yeah.
give me some, yeah, kind of comfort, and kind of like the almost like the wherewithal to kind of
Yeah.
face those. But I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's just kind of like, um, yeah, it's just the ups and downs, man. I think
Mm.
of
And
being
the
someone
other
who's
thing that I,
oh, go
the
ahead.
other thing that I sort of wanted to ask was like the the world today now is so much more kind of like uncertain. I mean, in it almost feels like now every day is like more uncertain, but generally that it's becoming more uncertain over the past 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
I mean, how comfortable are you with that, and how do you kind of cope
I
with
mean,
it?
I have an existential crisis. I think I'm perpetually living in an existential. I mean,
Mm,
I turned 50 in a month.
yeah, yeah,
Um, And that is, I usually don't have issues with, getting older or anything like that, but now it's
mm,
like, because I was a musician, um, and not on a traditional path, I haven't worked at the same company for 20 years. I don't have a pension. I don't have a 401,
yeah,
like, that kind of stuff where it was always pushed on you, especially in America, where like, hey, you work that job, you live that dream, you're going to get
yeah.
a payoff in the end. And now it's like, am I going to be working till I'm 85 years old?
True. Yeah.
It's
Yep.
like that is like scary, so it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and now having to think about that and not just think about, oh, I'm gonna write this record or I want to work on this music or I want to go see, Oasis play, which, I'm going to see Oasis. I love Oasis and my favorite bands, but like
Mm,
it's that is seen as like my escape now. Does that make
yeah.
sense?
Does.
And I see how kind of gives me a glimpse in how the rest of the world might be living all the time. Like they see what we might do as creative as something that we need to sustain ourselves. But for some other people, it's just like what we do is their outlet from this craziness that's happening right
From the
now,
craziness. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or what other like the festivals and music festivals, that is their kind of like outlet from thinking about this every day. I mean,
Mm,
this is the I try not to read the news anymore. I try not to,
yeah.
and I work in tech, and the
Mm,
stuff that I'm seeing every day, I'm just like, there better be a universal basic income soon.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
Skynet is happening, right?
It's happening, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's
It's
not
scary.
all, and it's not all like I'm not trying to be like a negative
Mm,
person about technology, but there's definitely some things that have been great about it. But it's a major human cultural shift that's happening right now.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think
Mm.
there's a lot of this. Where it's changing our natural behavior.
Yeah,
So we were talking, just a minute ago about this sort of marketing and how you have to sort of promote yourself and you have to write a certain way on, in whatever you post to get,
yeah,
and that fundamentally changes what our natural voice is. And I mean, that's just I'm sure just like a small example, but these whole kind of like behavioral changes that it's bringing is yeah, I do worry about that.
yeah. Well, it's just like I think we had talked about, like, getting into a room with people, right?
Mm,
Just that act in and of itself feels so foreign to some people, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
they've been in a generation where they've written music or created art in this isolation,
Isolation. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I forgot because during coming out of COVID, and even like, I and this is probably just my experience, but I wasn't playing in a band that was active during COVID at
yeah,
all. So I wasn't
yeah.
playing music for almost 2 years. I didn't play a show, which hasn't happened in I don't know how long. And
Mm,
I
mm,
for a while I was like, oh, this is nice that I don't have to think about music for a while, right?
yeah,
But then
yeah.
like, I was like, And then finally, when I started getting in a room with people and playing, I was just like, it's not just the act of creating with other people, but it's that human experience
Yeah,
that's part of our DNA, right? Of
it
of
is.
of
Yeah.
group, and I think there's like, I've been reading a lot of stuff on this, being alone, this epidemic, especially in the United
Mm,
States, people
mm.
experiencing like, being just alone,
Loneliness. Yeah,
loneliness, and I think art is should not create that. Art should be create a community around that, right?
totally. Yeah,
And with like the digital space, it's becoming very isolated, right?
yeah,
Like you could do everything just from my desk. I could do everything from my desk, right?
yeah.
So then like when
Abs-
going into like a practice or band practice, that's like feels like, oh my God, I'm actually having a human experience, right? Which is insane.
it is insane. It's like that stuff that kind of like was taken for granted. That's a given. That's how we kind of did it. And
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like kind of like a throwback to,
Yeah.
the way that it was, but that is really kind of what we crave as humans. But I worry that craving is being eroded away,
Yeah.
because we are sort of more isolated.
Yeah, and I try not to put my judgment on it
Mm,
because I'm obviously now few generations removed from what younger artists are doing,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But they're adapting. They're gonna adapt, right?
Adapt. Yeah, yeah,
Like they're adapting, and that this is their reality, which is and it's working, and they're as long as they're able to put out some sort of art that's like reflective of like of anyone's humanness, if that's a word.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I think
yeah.
I think we're getting really philosophical, but I think it's I think they're gonna figure it out. For us,
I think.
for me at least, it's a little harder, but they're gonna figure
Mm.
it out.
And I think that's one of our big strengths is that adaptability. That
Yeah.
we do when things seem like there's no kind of redemption. We are very adaptable. We do make the situations work for us in
Mhm.
some ways. And I guess coming back to that uncertainty, it's that okay, it feels uncertain. How's it going to work out? And maybe I often think, okay, am I feeling more like this because I'm getting older? You become a bit more risk averse and what have you. You don't deal with uncertainty quite as well as you used to.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that for sure.
Yeah,
Because I'm definitely not as
yeah,
like risk taking,
risk
as I was
taking.
when I was
Yeah,
younger. Like I was moving on whims. I was like, oh, you
yeah,
want me to play in your band? Cool. I'll just move to this other city I've
yeah,
never
yeah,
been, and just now would I do that? Probably
yeah.
not.
Probably
I don't
not.
know. But it's
Yeah,
like a lot. It's you're I think age plays into it as a different headspace, but from an artistic exploration standpoint, like, and this could be because, like I said before, I have a really hard time like finding new music and listening to more
Mm-hmm.
stuff within that genre that I'm a part of is it's the time to be fucking angry,
It's
right?
true. It is true.
And where is that anger?
Yeah.
Like, like there's a lot of bands doing a lot of heavy music and it doesn't have to be heavy even, whatever, but where is that fucking anger? And
Where's
for me,
that anger?
that anger was through music, was through art. And it just seems like, and maybe because I'm older that I'm not plugged in, right? Which
Mm.
is 100% probably the truth.
Yeah.
Um, but like, when like even the Hope Conspiracy, when we wrote this new record, we're fucking angry. We're older, but we are we're
Angry.
still angry,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we wanted
That
that to
comes through.
come off, huh? We wanted
It
that to
certainly
come.
comes through. Yeah.
Okay.
In the best possible way, I should say. Yeah.
Because that's what that band was for us. It's an outlet, and all of us are really like kind of mild-mannered in our everyday lives,
Yeah.
but watching what's happening, and it's like, I'm like, and there was a band that came out I'd say not now, 10 years ago.
Mm.
I don't know if they only put a demo out. They were called this band called Gloss. GLOSS. It was like an acronym
Okay.
for Girls Living Outside of Society's Shit.
Okay. Right. Right.
Okay. And they were, I believe there were some, I hope I say this correctly, that there was a few members in the band who were identified as trans.
Mm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And someone's like, you got to check this band out. And they were from like Tacoma. I never saw them. I don't know anyone who
Mm.
was part of the band. But I listened to the demo. I'm like, this is so angry.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they captured, I mean, I listened to that record, that demo the other day. And that band
Mm.
is like defunct now from probably 10 years. But I was like,
Wow.
where is this?
Where is
Right?
this? Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
so visceral. It is coming from a place that just from listening to it, seems very genuine. Like I don't know anybody in the band. I don't know what is happening,
Mm.
but it is angry, right? And it's like that is like what that
That's what you need.
it took me back to like being in my car when I was a kid. Like if I would have gone to that show, and when you were younger, when you'd go to these shows, your
Yeah.
ears would be ringing, but you were on this high, right? And just listening to that demo
Yeah.
gave me that for the first time when I first listened. I was like in my 40s when I first listened to that thing, right? I was like, so it's like I think that anger is, yeah, I'm waiting for it, and even like hip hop too used to be fucking angry, right?
Angry. Yeah. Yeah. I think. Yeah. You're right. I mean, I think with music being so available, it's like you can find everything. It's at the touch of a button. Um, it becomes harder to find that music. I don't. Paradoxically, it becomes harder to find that music that really hits you like
Yeah,
Gloss did with you. But
yeah.
when it does, and I think in a way, yeah, when it does, it's like wow, the impact is probably greater now. But because it
Well,
is harder to find. Maybe there's just because there's so much music out there that's available to us that we um don't feel that as much. I don't know, but when it
yeah.
hits, it really does nowadays.
And I think it's also, as much as, I have a lot of friends who are very much still, around the same age and who are like always going to shows and stuff like that. And I was like,
Mm.
how do you guys do this? It's like, and you have to temper, it's like someone asked me the other day, it's like, how do you feel? It's like, I obviously would, if I went to go see a punk band or hardcore band play a super small venue or a basement or a house show, it'd be awesome.
Yeah,
However, it's not going to connect with me the same way it connected with me when I was like 17.
yeah,
It's just not going to happen, right?
yeah, yeah,
And that's in my, and I feel some loss in that. Does that on myself, right?
I know what you
As
mean.
you get
Yeah,
older, you're
yeah,
like, oh my God, I wish that, it's
yeah,
just, it connects differently. Like, when you're like that 17-year-old kid, you go to this basement, you're like, I'm going to a show. None of my high school peers know what this is because it's so subversive, and this band is just
Yeah.
blowing everybody out of the water with these amps
Yeah.
so fucking loud. The cops are gonna show up, right? There's just like, and then
Yes.
like, oh, the cops are here. All right, what's up, guys?
This
Later,
is this makes it memorable. This is what you want. This is what
Mhm.
you want, that kind of long lasting effect, don't you?
Yeah, it's like I think like one of my friends refused. I think played their last. Actually, it was the guitar player from God Collider, Fred, who
Oh
plays in I
yeah.
think Middle Class Brats now. He was living in a punk house in Virginia that refused played their last U.S. show in before they broke up before these reunions.
Right,
And
right.
it was a house show. There was like not many people there. The cops showed up, arrested a few people. One of our other friends like running around naked who got arrested protesting "fuck the police" or some shit like like that shit like that. You're gonna remember that. I'm sure that stuff happened, still happening, but I guess this is just I don't want
It,
this conference to divulge into like an old dude
no,
reminiscing.
no, no, no. That's brilliant. Well, Niraj, thanks so much. It's
Yeah,
been a
thanks so much.
pleasure
I
and an
appreciate
honor. It's
it.
been so good, man. It's been so good, man, to talk.
I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.